Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. It is July 14, 2015, middle of the summer. So thank you for joining us this evening. This is one of my favorite topics. I think it actually is something we talk about a lot in a lot of the webinars, but I think it's really a core principle for families that are dealing with children who are struggling. And I think it's crucial for us to understand. And it's a very difficult idea to grasp because it is kind of abstract and because it can't be defined by behaviors, but really by our internal sense of ourselves and our relationship with our children. So eager to get into it this evening. Let's talk about what detachment is and what it is not. In the book Love First by Jeff and Deborah J, that's the title of their book. It's about intervention. And really, what they talk about is this idea that intervention has to come from a place of love for it to be most effective. And that if we don't do it from a place of love, then it's almost impossible for it to be effective. And if we do it from a place of love, we have a chance, fighting chance, at creating a healthy intervention. So it's important to understand that detachment comes from a place of love. In fact, I think detachment, in my opinion, is evidence of love in a lot of ways. It's love without control. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of risk because in detachment, we have to let go of the outcome. We have to be willing to feel pain. We have to be willing to face and own and deal with our own anxieties and own them in the process. And then to act courageously. And I think a lot of times we use others, we use our children, we use the outcome, we use all of these bits of information to try to alleviate our anxiety, and we're not really dealing with it, right? We're not really making any progress. We might temporarily experience the mitigation of our anxiety, right? It might be a little bit muted during that time, but we're not really, if we're holding on to these things, we're not really making any progress in terms of owning and dealing with our own anxiety. That doesn't mean that we don't act, that we're not assertive, but we're not acting out of a place of anxiety and fear. It really is defined by differentiation. And I'll talk about that toward the end of the webinar. But differentiation, to make a broad definition, is the balance between connectedness and separation. And it wasn't modeled for any of us to an optimal sense in our family of origin. So we all have some challenges and some blind spots around it, right? Whether we are reactive and that reactiveness looks angry, or reactive and that reaction looks, that reactiveness looks chaotic or scared, or reactive and that reactiveness looks like overprotecting or over involvement. It's all evidence of a lack of differentiation. It's this balance of being connected with autonomy. It sees the self first, and in so doing, to the extent that we see ourselves and we have a lay of the landscape. We can see the edges of our own boundaries, of who we are, of what our influence is, what our responsibility is, what is our feeling, what is the other person's feeling. And if the other person has a feeling, does that compromise my boundaries? If another person has an opinion of me, does that compromise my sense of myself, my feelings for the day, my sense of success, all of those things? So to the extent that we can see the edges of our boundary, we then have the capacity to see the other. And that's why so much of my work in these webinars and in my book is about teaching parents to find themselves, to always go back to finding themselves. Because when you can find yourself, when you can stay grounded, then you have a chance at seeing to your child and responding to their needs instead of your needs through them. Like I was telling a parent earlier today, who are you taking care of and at whose expense? Or in another case, I was talking to another parent and I was saying, you're not really taking care of your child in this instance. You're taking care of yourself through them, through the person of your child. You're trying to heal some wound in your own history, in your own past, and fight your own demons. And you're doing it through them. And when we do that, we're not really seeing them. We're not really separate from them. We're fused with them. And of course, detachment is assertive. Detachment means that we can tell the truth. Detachment means that we can make courageous steps. Right? People that are detached, if they do it with a place of love, and that's what the word healthy comes into in healthy detachment. If we do it from a place of love, it's healthy detachment instead of cut it off or disregard. Then we actually take courageous steps in a relationship and we don't try to manage what the other person is thinking or feeling. Right? We're sensitive to it. We understand it. We have empathy for it. We have compassion for the other. but we don't lose ourselves in the process. What is it not? It's not merely separation. It's not merely abandonment. I think I was talking to some parents this week. They were talking about what they could do to provide for their child. And really, what they can provide, what you can provide for your child, is the best possible connection. But that's not defined by geography. That's not defined by how much you talk to them. That's defined by how clear you are about yourself and then subsequently how clear you are about them. It's not simple disconnection. Of course, it's not being dependent, especially when it comes to dependence on the other person, especially in that of a parent, right? When your child says you're not safe, or when you find your child lying to you or not telling you the whole truth, do you ask yourself, what am I doing? Is there something here that I'm doing that's not safe? Can I ask myself those questions, but not be so influenced by them that it's about me, right? So there's this balance there. It's not blaming. Detachment doesn't blame, doesn't look for to point the finger. Of course, it's not codependent. It's not about failing, and it's not about being passive. A lot of people will think that when I talk about detachment, I talk about doing nothing. The people that practice healthy detachment are oftentimes the most passionate and the most assertive. So why is detachment, healthy detachment, so important? Because it encourages autonomy and competency in the other, right? We can hold our children accountable. Our boundaries don't have to be compromised. We can be informed by what other people say. We can ask ourselves questions, but we're not beholden to what other people think and what they do and how they act. And again, there's that balance. It requires a strong sense of self. I was modeling for somebody this afternoon this idea of responding to their adult daughter in a certain circumstance. And we role played it where she was playing the mother and I was playing the daughter. Or excuse me, she was playing the daughter and I was playing the mother. And the daughter was complaining and saying all these negative things. And my response was pretty grounded. I mean, it's easy to do in a role play, right? And I asked her how she felt about it. She said, I felt great about it. I felt great about what you said. And I said, most importantly, what prevents you and I at having access to those kinds of skills when we're talking to the person, to our child? And what we really unpacked was that what prevents it is our own insecurities. Because if we aren't insecure, right? If we are grounded, we can look at ourselves, we can ask ourselves tough questions, we can be accountable, we can hear what somebody says and say, maybe I messed up. And it doesn't get to the point where we enable or rescue or compensate for or make up for. Right? We don't do all of those things. We just hear it and have empathy and have some sorrow, some acknowledgement about what we've done. So it requires autonomy and it requires a strong sense of self. Excuse me, it encourages autonomy and requires a strong sense of self. It's synonymous with intimacy. And this is my idea. This is the idea that I stumbled upon years ago doing these webinars. When somebody asked me why I always talked about healthy detachment and why don't I talk about reunion or intimacy or closeness, and then I, after finishing the webinar, asked myself a series of questions, and I realized this, and this is maybe the most important thing that I can say on this webinar, is that healthy detachment is healthy connection. It's the same thing. We use the word detachment to emphasize that there are some pieces that we need to pull apart, pull out of each other. But really, healthy detachment is healthy intimacy, it's healthy attachment, it's connection, it's all of those things. And those things that we think are connection, that we think are intimacy, those are oftentimes mutations, right? Counterfeit forms of connection and intimacy. Fighting, arguing is not intimacy. Becoming reactive, enabling, rescuing, it's not love, it's not intimacy, it's not connection, it's none of those things. And so we have to fight against our instincts. We have to fight against the way we've been conditioned, the way we've been raised, and to learn a different kind of relationship with people. And that starts with, oftentimes, a very disciplined and consistent self-evaluation, looking at myself, asking myself tough questions, learning about how my history affected me, what in my context, what it's taught me, and who I am in this process. What are my fears? What are my anxieties? How do I try to control? It models healthy self-care. Healthy detachment models healthy self-care. And I think If nothing else, if you won't do it for yourself, practicing self-care, which is going to be the next webinar, practicing self-care is one thing you can do to model for your children what it means to be a strong man or a strong woman, a strong individual, somebody that can take care of themselves. To stop maintaining the cycle of addiction or other problem behaviors, we oftentimes inadvertently reinforce the things that we're trying to discourage through some of our behaviors. We do that by the way that we hold the other in our mind, the way we think about their problems. Again, it's not defined by the behavior. Whether I say to my 25-year-old son, you have to leave the house, or I take him back in, that's not the definition of poor detachment or poor connection or codependency. Those aren't the definitions. The definition of why am I doing it? Do I think I can rescue them? Do I have to make up for something? Holding a boundary versus not holding a boundary, the health of that is defined by am I taking responsibility for something else? Am I trying to manage something that's not mine to manage? And we can't always define this when we're in it, and children can rarely define it. But they know that it doesn't feel good, and they know over the long run, although it might serve them in the short run for their parents not to have healthy detachment, in the long run, it's unbearable. It's untenable. You can't maintain it. So examples are rescuing and enabling or overfunctioning. And oftentimes, these things become a distraction from the problem behavior, right? These things become in themselves their own disorder, their own disease. And of course, we inadvertently reinforce behaviors. So why is healthy detachment difficult for us to define? Because we confuse it with passivity or inactivity, right? That's what we hear when we hear it. We confuse it with indifference or an absence of love. It's not that. It's the opposite of that. It is courageous, honest, authentic, grounded love. We're afraid of the loss. We're afraid of the separation. We're afraid that we're not going to be loved, that we're going to be judged, that we're going to be rejected, that we're going to be alone. Right? We let go of control. I was using this illustration with somebody this afternoon. When Obi-Wan turned off the lightsaber in the first Star Wars, he was practicing letting go. When Luke Skywalker closed his eyes when he was going into the Death Star, he was practicing letting go. And by the way, George Lucas didn't write that stuff on accident. He knew this stuff. He knows what we're talking about. He read Joseph Campbell and studied this stuff and understood what it meant to be an individual human being capable of healthy connection with other people, which is the first ingredient in connection, right? The first ingredient in connection is a whole, grounded, confident, secure self. But we fear the loss. We fear the loss of control. We fear the loss of the other. We feel pain. We fear pain, and all of that gets in the way and blocks us from knowing what healthy detachment is. This is another point. Back to the question. Why is it hard to define? Because it's something we have to know in our hearts for us to understand. Because it can't be defined intellectually. Right? This is not an academic or intellectual exercise. This is a spiritual, psychological exercise. And everybody attending this webinar, I suspect, is intelligent enough to understand the definition of it. But when our stuff, when our family of origin, when our family of creation, procreation, gets into the mix, into the equation, we lose connection. We lose the ability. We get in this soup, this collective mass of selves, and we lose ourselves. I have a friend who, after going to treatment for codependency for, I want to say 45 days. I'm not sure the length of time, but it was a significant length of time. And if you wonder if codependency is harmful, it can destroy your life. And she knew this. And after she had been in treatment, we were driving together, and we pulled up to her home, and there was somebody working on the yard, and she apologized for the wind. And I after she rolled up the window, I said to her, "Do you realize you just apologized to the gardener for the weather?" And we laughed at that about that, and that became this symbol between us of how difficult it is for us to not fall back into those old patterns in our lives. We fear failure. One of the difficult things for parents is that they want to be a good parent. And wanting to be a good parent is one of the biggest barriers to being an effective and healthy parent. Because if I want to be a good parent, I'm going to have a difficult time looking at my mistakes, even if it's only a little bit, because I need to be good. I need to be good to be worthwhile, to be loved, to be accepted, to be wanted, to be desirable, to be okay. And so we have to learn to be imperfect. Like Carl Jung said, I would rather be whole than good. We have to learn to be whole, to look at those parts of ourselves, those wounds, those symptoms, those issues, to be able to be more effective. And then we fear pain. And we fear either the pain in ourselves or the pain in the others. This is that over identification. And as I've described before, over identification with children is the most severe kind of style of abandonment. I'll say that again. Over identification, over involvement, by its definition, is the most severe form of abandonment, the most severe style of abandonment. Because in that dynamic, there is no other. There's only a self, and it's fused with the other self. By definition of over identification, we see our children as mirrors, as extensions, as evidence of our goodness or badness of parents. And by the way, this healthy detachment doesn't lead to an abdication of our parental responsibilities. It merely is a focus on our parental responsibilities. Like I always say, compliment me on something my child does, I'm confused. Compliment me on something I did, makes sense. Compliment me on listening well, on being assertive, on overcoming a negative pattern in my life, I'll take it because I'm working hard at that. Compliment me on how well my children are behaved, or that they got into college, or that they got sober. That's confusing to me. That's not healthy detachment. Healthy detachment is me seeing me and me seeing the other. So I borrowed this from a website. It's the ability to allow people, places, or things the freedom to be themselves. Holding back from the need to rescue, save, or fix another person from being sick, dysfunctional, or irrational. Giving another person the space to be herself. Disengaging from an over-enmeshed or dependent relationship with people. A willingness to accept that you cannot change, or control a person, place, or thing. Developing and maintaining a safe, emotional distance from someone whom you have previously given a lot of power to affect your emotional outlook on life. Establishing of emotional boundaries between you and those people you have become overly enmeshed or dependent with, in order that all of you might be able to develop your own sense of autonomy and independence. Process by which you feel you are free to feel your own feelings when you see another person falter and fail, and not be led by guilt to feel responsible for their failure or faltering. And several more one-line definitions. Healthy detachment is the ability to maintain an emotional bond of love, concern, and caring without the negative results of rescuing, enabling, fixing, or controlling. Placing of all things in life into healthy, rational perspective, and recognizing that there is a need to back away from the uncontrollable and unchangeable realities of life. Ability to exercise emotional self-protection and prevention so as not to experience greater emotional devastation from having hung on beyond a reasonable and rational point. Ability to let people you love and care for accept personal responsibility for their own actions, and to practice tough love and not give in when they come to you and bail them out when their actions lead to failure or trouble for them. Ability to allow people to be who they really are rather than who you want them to be. Ability to avoid being hurt, abused, taken advantage of by people who in the past have been overly dependent or enmeshed with you. I remember I was describing to a parent this idea of detachment, and they were talking about a certain reactiveness that they had with their child, and they were describing a certain criticism that their young adult child shared with them during the course of treatment. And I said, so describe this. When they described the scene where they were being criticized by their 22-year-old son in treatment. And I said, that's not the original wound. I don't suspect. Because this was a repetitive pattern that the son would accuse this father of being or doing. And I said, that wound has its place in your history. And that wound might not affect me in the same way. That statement, that accusation, that criticism. And so I described how we kind of, from our own histories, We teach our children, we pass on to them our vulnerabilities, and they accuse us of those things that we don't want to be: unfair, unloving, unkind, uninvolved, whatever it is, right? Those are the demons. Those are the guards that we have to pay, that we have to pass as we escape this prison of codependency to healthy detachment. And so we teach our children unconsciously what we don't want to be. And that's what they accuse us of. And here's how I see this play out in our program. Children, young adult and adolescent children, come into the program and they accuse us of many of the same kinds of things that they've accused you of. And I'll often say to them, that works at home, huh? This gets people to react what you're saying to me, because it doesn't do anything to me. I barely can hear it. And I'll forget about it in 10 minutes after we're done talking. But what that tells me about is that it tells me about your context. It tells me about the vulnerabilities that your parents have in this context. And it tells me where they get hooked or triggered by you. So eventually they learn our triggers. Eventually they learn our soft spots, and they're capable of kind of pushing against us a little bit more because we teach them to them. But we don't have the same ones that you have. Not in the same way. And I see them try to use that as they respond to us. So when we demonstrate healthy detachment, also I stole this from the internet. When we let go of our expectations of others and not try to make them fulfill our wants, our own wants and needs, we are practicing healthy detachment. When we are able to remain in a place of joy and satisfaction while being in the presence of someone who's in a negative place, we are practicing healthy detachment. When we refrain from offering advice and ways to fix things, but truly listen to someone else, we are practicing healthy detachment. That third bullet point is crucial. And I have so many parents say to me, wait a second, isn't my job to teach? And my thought is, not as much as you think. Not as often as you think. Right? They already know what you think. They give us your lectures 5 weeks into the program. They're giving your lectures to the other new students, the new clients in the group. They got them memorized. They have your voice internalized. So they don't need new data. They need to struggle. They need to figure it out. And they don't need another lecture or another analogy from you. Although I know as well as anybody, it's extraordinarily tempting to trot those ideas and those well-crafted metaphors out on my children. When we allow someone to make his or her own decision and follow through with it, even though we believe it will not have a beneficial outcome, we are practicing healthy detachment. And with adolescents who live in your home, what that looks like is you follow through with the consequences. Right? You stop trying to micromanage and control them into the decision that you want. You set a boundary, you set an expectation, you set a consequence, and then you let them follow through with it. And in some cases, that has brought them to evoke. In some places, circumstances, that's brought them to an out-of-home placement, an out-of-home intervention. But that's what it looks like in the home. Instead of trying to nag, beg, plead, threaten, get louder, extend the consequence, talk them into it, all of those things. When we appropriately set a boundary with someone by refusing to engage him or her in an argument, we are practicing healthy detachment. I'm going to even change a word there. Even engage the other person in a discussion sometimes is an excuse for a boundary. It's a substitute for a boundary. We're trying to get permission. We're trying to get agreement, consensus. We're trying to get our children to approve, to like, to choose, to vote on our decision. 6 steps to detachment, also stolen from the internet. Accept reality. There's very little you can do to change anyone besides yourself, and other people's problems aren't yours to solve. I can't tell you how many times parents, especially with young adults, will share a problem with me, and my response is, well, that doesn't sound like it's your problem. Well, yes, it is, because this and this and this with my young adult, he's lost his license, and then if he loses his license, then he doesn't have a car, and then he doesn't have transportation, then he loses his job, and then his probation officer. That still doesn't sound like your problem. Give yourself credit. You have done a lot to help, right? I was talking to a parent today about this idea that at any given time you've done the best that you could, and you could have done better. Both are true all the time of all of us. Restore balance. Seek balance and peace in your own life as best you can. Like I always say, your peace and serenity is your responsibility, not your child's. They don't have to behave, change their life so that you feel okay. That's not their job. It's their job to figure it out. And if they accept the responsibility to find a healthier way to live, that's their responsibility, should they choose to accept it. But their job is not to make you happy. You might have learned that from your parents, but it wasn't true. It's not true. Never has been. Let go. Remember that others' behaviors are not a reflection on you, and their behaviors are not personal. You can't control what they do, but you can control how much you'll take or how you'll respond. I would love to tell you that I'm wonderful at this, and I'm not. This fourth one is a very difficult one with me. Right? I have shame that gets activated, triggered by my children and their behaviors, but it's mine. And it's my work and it's my project, and it's why I'm still going to therapy and doing the work that I'm doing. React less. Notice when your feelings seem to be tied to the other person. Try to figure out why this happens. Then practice detachment next time. Sometimes detachment means you have to walk out of the room. Sometimes detachment means you can't be involved in a certain situation or circumstance, right? If you can't do it while remaining detached, then you might have to take the extra step. I talk about all the time that sometimes I have to walk out of the room with my young adult children, right? Because I'm not strong enough to sit there and hold a straight face because I want to tell them something or correct them or teach them or point something out. And you might imagine that I've developed quite a repertoire of being able to analyze people and pick apart some of their faulty thinking. So I have to remove myself from the conversation, the room, the circumstance. Practice self-care. Get in touch with your own needs and wants. Let others take care of you. Accept their compliments and find mutual relationships. I was talking to somebody today about this idea. You can use a therapist. You can use a mentor, a sponsor to sort some of these things out, to bounce some of these ideas out. Somebody you trust, oftentimes, ideally, a professional or somebody that's in recovery whose job it is to sponsor you. Those can be people that can be healthy sounding boards for you. But your children can't be those same sounding boards. Neither can your spouse or your parents or your sibling. Because oftentimes you're often triggered and all of your issues are mixed together and you don't have a strong separation from them and them from you. In time, you will find you feel calmer, less angry, less anxious, and better able to respond to your own life. This is some family systems theory that I'm going to share with you. Some of my favorite examples. These concepts are from Salvador Minuchin and Murray Bowen. Salvador Minuchin was in Philadelphia, and he worked at the Child Guidance Clinic in Philadelphia, and he developed one of the branches of family therapy. Murray Bowen was a psychiatrist who also developed a model of family therapy. And interestingly enough, Murray Bowen never worked with two people at once, although he's considered one of the fathers, one of the founders of family systems theory and family therapy. But he thought of people in the context of their system. He did work with individuals and then sent them back out into their system the same way that we do to try to react a different way. But he thought about the systemic impacts and influences. So Salvador Minuchin had a model and defined it as health on a continuum. And on one end of the continuum was enmeshment. Enmeshment was defined as a loss of autonomy due to a blurring of psychological boundaries. Disengagement was the other opposite, just as pathological end that he called disengagement. Psychological isolation that results from overly rigid boundaries around individuals and subsystems in a family. Murray Bowen had a different model. He defined two parts on a continuum this way. He said emotional cutoff, and this is his term for enmeshment, is Bowen's term for flight from an unresolved emotional attachment, right? We do this in America. We solve the problem of family of origin enmeshment and fusion by running away, by moving away, by distance. Fusion, he defined as a blurring of psychological boundaries between self and others and a combination of emotional and intellectual functioning. And basically what he said was, you can be fused in between interpersonally or intrapsychically. If your emotions and your thoughts are too overlapping, you become reactive. So intrapsychic and interpersonal differentiation. And basically it looks like this visually. Minuchin said that in the middle there is clarity, and on opposite ends there is disengagement and enmeshment. And Bowen said something quite different. He said on one end of the continuum, the left side of the arrow, there is cutoff, emotional cutoff, and fusion. And on the right side of the arrow, going that way, and he made it as an arrow because nobody ever really gets there. We can talk about things optimally, but few, if anyone, ever reaches the optimal level, is differentiation. So he said, cutoff, or in Minuchin's word, disengagement, and fusion, or in Minuchin's words, enmeshment, that those are just stylistically different. They just look different behaviorally, but they're the same thing. They're the lack of differentiation, the lack of healthy boundaries. And basically what he's saying is healthy boundary around yourself equals healthy connection to others. What it looks like when we are not detached. These are tools for self-examination. We're often angry and have reactive outbursts. We become passive or pleasing, often compromising ourselves in the process. We practice the silent treatment, game playing, or manipulating. Chronically repetitive dialogue, bullying, nagging. Depression or anxiety over others' behaviors. We blame others for our feelings. We take the victim stance. In essence, we are codependent with the other, or obsessed with, that's my favorite word to describe it, obsessed with trying to control or fix the other person to gain a greater sense of well-being in our lives. So what are the take home? Become educated. Read books about codependency. Read a daily reader. Practice self-care. Go take care of yourself. Practice detachment. That's an important word. Practice it. Get support. Professional support. Group support. Community support. Not from your family. Not from those that you have a personal relationship with. Attend Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous or Families Anonymous. Go to therapy. Turn it over to the other or to your higher power. Learn to let go. Learn to say, it's up to them now. I'll do the best that I can and I'll continue to do the best that I can, and ultimately it's up to them. Or turn it over to your higher power, to the universe, to God, as you understand God. Practice the beginner's mind. Always be a student. Open your mind up and listen to the other so that you learn that when somebody else is talking to or reacting to you, that it's not about you. And then begin to practice and develop a sense of radical acceptance, which is the Buddhist idea of what is. Stop thinking about what should have been or the way that it should be, or that we're off track, or that this is a mistake, or that a detour, or let's get back on track. I want it to be different. Because all of those things create suffering. And just realize this is what it is. My best friend has cancer. My child is a drug addict. My daughter has depression. I didn't ask for this. I don't want it. But it is what it is. And I'm going to jump into it with the lessons that it has to teach me, with the wisdom that it has to offer, with the depth that it has to offer me. I'm going to learn to become a different, more developed, more evolved self through this process. I'm going to transform as I learn to listen better, or go to meetings, or communicate more assertively, or I learn things that really weren't required of me when I was going along smoothly. But radical acceptance suggests that our source of suffering is us not accepting what is. It's the idea that this program is a detour. I'll tell you what, this program is a springboard to a more spiritual, evolved, psychologically healthy life. The problems that got your children here oftentimes are catalysts for them and for you and for the whole family system to be a richer human being. That's what this is. That's what I see. That's my experience, what it tells me. I can see that in my own life, and I can see that in the lives of the thousands of clients that I've worked with. So radical acceptance is a key point. It's a lot like faith in Christianity, or the Jewish faith, or Islamic faith. All right, I'm happy to take questions. First, we'll go to topic-related questions, then I'll go over some announcements, then I'll go to any other questions. Sometimes the topic-related questions take a while to come in, so I'll go to those afterwards. Here's what I've learned today. Letting others voluntarily evolve. Absolutely. That doesn't mean that you don't set a boundary. For those of you who are watching, listening, doesn't mean you don't set a boundary, but you don't take responsibility for the others. You take responsibility for yourself. Is it fair to ask our therapist whether he has identified any of our vulnerabilities from his interactions with our child? Absolutely. And ask your therapist tough questions like that. Can you see? I mean, that's why I always start. Here's how my phone calls go with parents. How are you doing? Seriously, how are you doing? Let's talk about the letters you got this week. What was your reaction? I want to hear your reaction before I do any analysis or teaching about the week. Excuse me. Because I want to see how you get triggered. What triggers you? We're also going to use your letters to illustrate what your child seems to think works. So we'll talk about that. Sometimes I'll have parents write an impact letter to themselves as if they were their child. Right? Here's what I wouldn't like about you. Here's what I would struggle with you. Sometimes I have them send it. But anyway, back to the phone call. Then after that, then we go to the evaluation of the week. What was going on? Then what that means to me in terms of my analysis and what letters we're going to work on this week. That's how my phone calls go. And sometimes we get really, really deep into the analysis piece. And so we spend 40 minutes on that. But ask your therapist to share that with you and see what they have to say and be open to it. Just be open, just chew on it, just listen to it instead of defending it or debating it or even anything other than just considering it during the phone call. Absolutely, you can ask for it. But it might be coming through in some of the other pieces of the phone call like I just described. I have a terribly hard time not riding my son's emotional roller coaster with him. I do my best, but when he has successes, I feel so good, and when he tanks, I feel so darn bad. I've been trying to overcome this for the last 9 months, but I'm not even close to letting go. What is the absolute first step I can take? That's it. You're doing it. Talk to him about it, and teach him that even though it looks like it's about him, it's not. The first step is to name it in yourself, and maybe even share that with others. And then the next step is to go to therapy and find out where that comes from so you can deal with it in its original context. Because it's not about your son, it's about you. See, Murray Bowen had this idea that we grow up in a certain level of emotional closeness. He would define it on a scale from 0 to 100. Let's say that you grew up in a household where 75 is the emotional closeness. And he says we don't hang around people beyond just a few points outside of our level of differentiation, right? If we're 75, we hang around people that are 70 to 80. We raise children that are somewhere between 70 and 80. We think that people are different. We think our spouse is different than the family of origin, right? We think the people that we're dating, that we're around are different because the facts look different, the details look different, but they have the same comfort level in terms of intimacy and healthy detachment. It just works out that way. And that's why we can run into our family of origin over again in our family of procreation without seeing it coming. Because it's this invisible dynamic of differentiation, of detachment, of connection, of intimacy. So the first thing to do is to own it, to name it. Because I have this too. I can talk about this. And then go to therapy and deal with it in its original context. Is there a daily reader you can suggest for the codependents? My favorite daily reader is by Melanie Beatty called The Language of Letting Go. I have it on my iPhone, and it comes up with a daily reading. And I don't read it every day, but I read it a lot of days, and it's fantastic. So The Language of Letting Go by Melanie Beatty. I think she has 2 volumes. I use the first volume. And Melanie Beatty is one of those people who gets it. Like, she sees it. She's not off very often. She's fantastic. Also, The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner is another great resource. And then, of course, The Journey of the Heroic Parent by Brad Reedy is a great resource for you. How do you detach from a young adult who is not motivated to do anything? It's not about him. I mean, that question is exactly the issue. He doesn't decide whether you detach or not. You do. Right? It's not up to him whether you detach. Otherwise, by definition, you're not detaching. You're not the victim. It's not happening to you. Right? Now, there is a reason why the dance is the way that it is. And that's where you get outside professional help. But you take action, you get assertive, you take a stance, you set boundaries, you do your own work, do your own work, do your own work, do your own work. Share that you're doing your own work with them. Go away and do your own work. Come to one of our intensives. Go to one of the many intensives across the country that many programs have. Spend 3, 4, 6 days doing your work. Go to meetings. Go to therapy. You do that work. And you know what I look for when I'm working with a parent is, do they think they have work to do that is about them? Or do they think they have work to do to change their child, to affect their child, to change the child's behavior? And that's a barrier. But if they think they have work to do, if they think this is my unhappiness, my struggle is mine, Yes, my child is crazy and in these specific ways, but that's not going to stop me. So my answer to the question is to learn that he doesn't have to change for you to change. He doesn't have to change for you to have a different relationship with yourself and with him. And to really realize what that is. And you might need, like I said, therapeutic help, therapy help. I know I do. That's why I've been going to therapy for the many, many years that I've been going. How do you stay detached when your child has suffered a trauma that has caused him to act out in destructive ways? Same question in a different way, right? Same. Detachment is not about not having compassion, and it's not about being passive. Detachment is learning to be responsible for your own happiness, to not be so consumed by your empathic misery, right, that you compromise yourself, to not try to compensate for it, to even have confidence that he's going to be okay. By the way, to a larger or smaller degree, everybody's experienced trauma. Some children have been raped, molested, abandoned, physically abused, right? Oh, the list goes on. Horrible things. But detachment is especially important for families that have experienced trauma. Because if you're not detached, you can't connect because it's the same thing. And if you can't connect, you can't nurture. You can't provide for your child. So it's imperative in the case of trauma, more specifically, that you learn and practice healthy detachment so that you can be there for them. So you're making sure that you're taking care of his needs, not your needs in the process. Not taking care of your empathic misery or suffering, but to take care of him or her. So it's imperative. And it's difficult. It's difficult, folks. It's difficult. That's why I know something about this stuff because of how much I have struggled and do struggle with it. Oh, I didn't make her a presenter, I don't think. I didn't make my Stephanie a presenter, so she can't talk to me. So I keep getting, she keeps freezing, so that's why she's not talking to us. So let me move on. Stephanie will rejoin us in just a moment, and then she'll maybe get back to us. So these are support groups that you can go to that will help you with these principles, that will give you practice, that is a peer supported group. So it's not professionals talking down to you, but from people who can share the same kind of experiences with you. Follow us on social media. You can find announcements, articles, announcements for our blog, things like that. Please follow Evoke Therapy programs. Here's the book that I'm referring to that I wrote, The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Talks about a lot of these things. It's basically taking my years of webinar experience and sharing in a book. You can also, I've been told by parents to make sure that parents know that it's available on Audible and for CD purchase so that you can listen to it while you drive or while you're commuting. Here are the upcoming parent support groups in LA. I'll be there tomorrow night, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. RSVP to 49jennifer at live.com. By popular request, I will be back in Chicago on the North Shore Wednesday, July 29th. Oh, excuse me. I think that's the 28th. Whatever Wednesday is of that week. Check your announcements. Check our website for that. But I'll be in the North Shore the 28th or 29th, 7 to 9 p.m. at a new address. Respond to Stephanie at evoketherapy.com. And then in New York City, I haven't settled the date. I think it's going to be toward the end. I'm going to be in New York City toward the end of the month. And then here's our intensive and workshop. Our workshop is something we would like every parent to go to while their child is here. It's a 2-day experience hosted by Dr. Paul Goddard at our Entrada location. Contact Gail at Evoke Therapy for more information. Then the next three intensives that I'm hosting are a family intensive on August 21st, a parenting intensive on September 10th, and a Finding You, that's for anybody individually, on October 8th through 12th. These are the last three that I can guarantee that I will be facilitating because we're going to be training other people. I'll be doing some down the road, but these are the next and last three that I'll be doing. So please RSVP to Stephanie at evoketherapy.com. And then if you want your young adult to go to a Pursuits, a high adventure program, that's kind of a refresher program, you can attend there. Let me make sure. Yeah, Stephanie's a presenter there. She's back with us. All right, Stephanie says she has some more questions. So as long as she stays on, we'll go ahead and answer those. This is the third week for our son. I have discovered I'm a rescuer. Are there any books or websites to help me? Go to the reader. Go to the webinars on codependency.com. Like I said, the book, The Dance of Anger, my book, Journey of the Heroic Parent, I think are two that can help. Melanie Beatty's Codependency No More is a fantastic one. She's the same one that is the author of The Reader that I use. Parenting from the Inside Out. If you go to my website, drbradreedy.com, and go to the book selection where it talks about my book, I also have a list of my 10 favorite books. So drbradreedy.com, click on the link book, and then look at the bottom of the page, and it actually has links to the 10 books that I really like for parenting. There are more, but those are my favorite. So that's a good resource for you. How do you deal with the feelings of anger when your child consistently violates trust and acts disrespectfully? Harriet Lerner says that anger is an effective tool only when it causes us to be more clear about ourselves. So when I find myself getting angry at somebody else, when I'm doing my best work, I find a way to focus on what I can do differently to require certain behavior. Getting angry about somebody about the way they're treating me is in some ways spinning my wheels. I'm expecting them to change, wanting them to change, hoping, begging, pleading, threatening, nagging, right? Demanding that they change. All of those things become excuses for healthy boundaries. So for me, I can just tell you for me, what it becomes is when I find my boundaries being violated by another, what can I do? What can I learn from that? That's the most effective way. This is a great example. Please read The Dance of Anger or look at the webinar, The Dance of Anger, where I talk about this. And I talk about this also in my book because I quote Harriet Lerner quite a bit in there. Learning to not just demand. You know, when parents say, he can't treat me that way, they can't treat me that way, my response is, yes, they can. They can. And what can you do to walk away? What can you do to separate yourself? What can you do? How do I set a boundary with a 16-year-old, with a 15-year-old, with an 8-year-old? And even with my 7-year-old, I have a 7-year-old right now. I have a 7, 13, 20, and 22-year-old. With all of them, right? That spans the gamut. And I've survived 2 teenagers so far. There's ways to set boundaries, even with my 7-year-old. And there's ways that I fail at setting boundaries, which sets a precedent, which develops a lack of detachment, for sure. So there are ways that we can do it. Walking away, not engaging, not debating, not arguing, not justifying, not explaining, not apologizing at times, apologizing at other times, owning my stuff, doing my work. And ultimately, at the end of the day, especially with our children, but even with our partner. This is in the book, the Search of the Magical Other, the Eden Project, the Search of the Magical Other. It's not anybody else's job to take care of me but me. It's my job. And if I'm waiting for somebody else to do it, I can ask for help and support, that's true. But if I can't do it, then nobody else is going to either. We have learned over the course of this experience that our child was sexually assaulted about 3 years ago. Are there any good books for us to read or webinars you would recommend? There's a webinar on trauma that I'd recommend. This is one of the areas that I've done a lot of practice in. And right now the book that I use is escaping me the title, but I think I mentioned it on the webinar. The Right to Innocence. The Right to Innocence is a book that I've used to help others understand what it's like, what they go through. But go to our website. In fact, Stephanie, I'm going to go out of this and come back. So on this page right here, if you go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon, it has several topics, and you can look under trauma there. And these are some of the books that our therapists at Evoke have recommended for parents to read on these topics. So that's a great resource for you to go there. You can go back to questions if you have some, Stephanie. Will you remind us where the recorded seminars are located? I want to rewatch this again and again. If you log on, I think I'm going to say this correctly, but ask your parent coordinator if you have problems. Log on to your parent portal. If you're an alumni, then email us at webinar@drbradreedy.com to make sure you're getting the information because they come in a spreadsheet. But log on to our website, and then when you click on the menu on the left, it will give you an option of webinars. And then you can search by term or by tag, and then you can click on those. For those of you who don't know, also, you can, when you go there, you can download the slides for any of our webinars, which I think is a pretty cool thing. So you don't have to take notes. You can download the slides. All right, folks. Thank you, Stephanie. Sorry you had some technical difficulties tonight. Next webinar is self-care, very related, but it's a topic, another phrase, another term that we use that isn't easy to define. So I'll talk about self-care. That's Monday, July 20th, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. So hope to see you then. And thanks for the large group that came tonight. And thanks for all of your questions. I hope that was a helpful point of contact for us. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, webinar at drbradreedy.com. And we'll talk to you next Monday. Take care. Bye-bye.